Welcome to the big show today. We've got a lot to pack into. What we have as usual our time frame to talk about sports this week, and I think next week, maybe next couple of weeks, we'll do 2 or maybe 3 shows a week until we get into the football season when training camp starts. And then obviously we'll be back to doing 4 or 5 shows. Heck, who knows? Maybe even 6 if we do one on the weekend. So right now we are just basically in that time period where, the NBA is done, the NHL is done. And if you're a team that's not really in the pennant race or anywhere close, Pirates, it's a real dead time of the year. So we will obviously have entertaining shows and try and do what we do. What I wanted to talk about, and I know this is going to be one of these things because I had a number of people that objected to the column that I wrote. I wrote a column, I guess it was yesterday, talking about the fact that the Steelers and the Pirates and the Penguins could all learn a lot from the Oklahoma City Thunder. Now, here's the thing. People get upset when you say things like this, and there's already a bias, like, oh, well, I hate the NBA, blah, blah, blah. Some people just say that kind of stupid stuff. But the reality is, it's not about the NBA. It's not about any of that. Okay? What it's about, more importantly, is that there are some things that the Oklahoma City Thunder did, that I think all 3 teams could learn from. When you think about it, this was a team, okay, that honestly, it would have been 2019 or so? I'm sorry, 2015 maybe, 16, somewhere around there. They went to the Western Conference Finals and they lost to Steph Curry and company. In a 7th game, they pushed them to the brink. It was good. It was all good stuff. The next 3 years with Russell Westbrook as their star and Paul George as their star, they were first round. They got knocked out of the first round. Now, the thing about that is they got knocked out of the first round 3 years in a row. And they basically decided we need to change the dynamics of the team. So they traded Paul George and they traded Russell Westbrook, and they got a bunch of picks back. And that became the catalyst for the team that they were going to build. The next year, they still had Steven Adams. And Steven Adams was a guy that was, he's a budding kind of superstar kind of player. So the next thing you know with him, they move on from him the next year, because the next year they lost in the first round of the playoffs. So now they had gotten rid of basically all their veteran guys. One of the guys they traded for was a really young Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They had a young superstar to kind of build around, and they had a slew of picks. In other words, they went all in on rebuilding. And I don't know that I would necessarily say they tanked, because they didn't tank. They didn't have to tank to get draft picks. They just traded guys. And I think when you trade guys like that, it's different than tanking. You got to understand, over the last 5 or 6 years, or 4 or 5 years that they've been building this team, they only had one top 5 pick. That's it. It's not like they, decided that we're just going to tank. What they decided was, we're going to go with guys who are draft picks. We're going to try and get them in our system. We're going to live with a really young team. And then each year we're going to build on it. And as Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and a couple of these other guys grow and get better and mature, by the time we get 2, 3, 4 years ago, that's what's going to happen. 3, 4 years from now, we're going to be able to do it. And that's what happened. They went through a 20-win season, then a 22-win season. And then 2 years ago, they had a 40-42 season. And what's interesting about that season, that team, and this is when I said they're going to be really good for the next 5 or 6 years, that team, okay, was younger, average age, younger starting lineup than Pitt that year. That was year Pitt had, what was his name, Nellie Cummings and Blake Hinson and that group, right? They were all old guys on that team. Their average age of their starting 5 was older than the Oklahoma City Thunders that year, because the Thunder had a bunch of young dudes. They won 40 games, and I said, you win 40 games with that group, they're only going to get better. They made a couple more trades. They added a couple of players. Guess what? All of a sudden now they win the NBA championship. Now, my point isn't that you always win the NBA championship. My point is that if you want to move forward sometimes, you have to move back. Now, when it comes to the Pirates, you could say, well, it's a salary cap league. Unlike Major League Baseball, it's not apples to apples. I agree with that to a point. The point I could say where the Pirates could really learn from the Thunder is if the Pirates drafted really well, used their draft picks well, and developed guys well. Because that's what Oklahoma City did. They drafted well. It wasn't like they just had a bunch of picks. They used them to build a team. And they developed those guys into NBA players. That's what you have to do. If you're the Pirates, guess what? That's what you have to do. You are not signing guys for big money. You just aren't. So the way you get stars is by drafting them. And after you draft them, by making sure that you develop them. And I think the poster child for this, honestly, is got to be Henry Davis. You drafted the guy 1-1. 1-1. And you didn't have a plan for him. You bounced him around position to position, but the position didn't know where you wanted him to be. I mean, he's a guy that should have had his own personal hitting coach and personal catching coach. They should have developed him to the point where, right now, people get excited if he's got a couple of games where he has a hit. Because it's like, maybe he's turning the corner. He should have already turned the corner. Nick Gonzalez, you know what? Right now he's hitting the ball well. Maybe he's going to turn into but he was a first-round pick that probably is going to be a complimentary player and a good second baseman, but that's not going to get you where you want to go either. He should be better than he is. Hopefully he'll start hitting with power because that's what they need. And they can't afford to go sign power hitters. So I just think that it's, one of those things where, we can sit here and talk about this as much, but the bottom line is the Pirates don't do a very good job of drafting guys. They don't do a very good job of developing guys. And if you don't have the money to sign guys, it's really hard to put together a decent roster. When it comes to the Steelers, look, you say whatever you want to say. The Steelers are in a salary cap league too. I argued this way back 5-6 years ago that I thought the Steelers, with about 2 years before he was done, they should have tried to trade Ben Roethlisberger for a slew of picks. Someone would have given them picks and then drafted their quarterback of the future. I said 2 years ago they shouldn't have signed T.J. Watt to a big extension. They should have traded him. The biggest thing is this is a team that wants to operate in this realm where they're what I would call almost pregnant. It doesn't work. All you do is have a team that year after year after year after year is near the middle and loses games in the playoffs, and everybody's frustrated. And I think that's the biggest thing. Everybody's frustrated at the end of the day. So to me, like what they could have learned from, the Thunder could have kept running Russell Westbrook and Paul George around and Probably had another 4 or 5 year run where they were, in the playoff chase, but they weren't going to be a team that actually made a serious run to the NBA championship. They weren't going to be able to get to the NBA Finals. So they decided to trade those two big-name stars, turn them into picks. And then they traded their other star, Steven Adams, turned him into some picks. And I think that, that's how you have to do things if you're stuck in the middle. And you know it. And I think that's the thing about the Steelers, to me, the non-losing season thing. We've had how many non-losing seasons in a row, blah, blah, blah. You can say whatever you want to say, but we're consistent. Yeah, but again, is the goal to be a 9 or 10 win team and lose in the first round every year? I don't think that's the goal. And I just think the Steelers could have done a much, much better job. A much, much better job of turning the roster over and giving themselves a chance to move forward. And I would tell you, they're probably not even the one that I would say is most, comparable to Oklahoma City. I would say the Penguins are. The Penguins, by doing what they've done, and they doubled down, what was it, last year, a year and a half ago or whatever, when they went and got Erik Karlsson, like, oh, we're pretty close. We just get this one guy to help us with the power play, and, we're going to have a fourth Hall of Famer. I think we're going to be – all you did was add another old guy to a team that's not ready to win. And I think that's the key. When the Penguins, it was clear after about 3 or 4, losses in the first round, they lost to Washington. Washington won the Stanley Cup. And then the next couple of years, they were just sort of a middling team. That's when you have to say, we're going to move on from Letang. We're going to move on from Malkin. We're going to move on from, some of these older other guys. We're not going to go sign a guy like Karlsson. We're going to try and get as many draft picks and as many prospects as we can. Well, they've started to do that. But the problem is, Sidney Crosby, how many more years does he really have? He can play at a really high level. Like, if they'd have done what they did where they, amassed all these picks 3 years ago, they could have avoided, the idea of wasting 3 years of Sidney Crosby at the end of his career. They would be ready to win now, or close, much closer to being a team that's ready to win. Instead, they're going to run it back again. I don't even understand what we're doing here, but they're going to run it back again. One more year with the gang, with the gang's all here. And then next year, I think, Malkin's going to retire next year probably. And, Letang is, maybe got one more year after that. And no. If you're the Penguins, you should have stripped it all down completely. Kept Sidney Crosby around, because obviously you're going to keep him around. And then tried to rebuild. And I think that there are people that say, well, when they did that, they at least had a team that, if they got to the playoffs, maybe they could make a run. No, come on. That's just not who they are or who they've been or what they are. They had their little run where they won 2 years in a row. And you know what? After that, it's over. And they don't want to recognize that it's over. But the only way you can actually move forward is by sometimes taking a step back. And I think Kyle Dubas is on the right track. I think he's actually, kind of doing the right things now. But even he, he signed Jari to that contract. And, he's made some deals. He's the one that brought Karlsson here. I mean, I'm looking at some of the things he's done, and I'm like, I don't know. Right? if that was all forced upon him. I've liked kind of what he's done since. I've liked the fact that, but again, over the next 3 years, what is it? They have like 30-some picks or something over the next 3 years, some crazy number like that. That's great, but none of those guys are going to be ready to help Sidney Crosby win. Now, maybe you can trade some picks and get a couple players or whatever, but, to me, if you had started this process 3 years ago, you might have some guys that you drafted. You might have some young guys that are ready to step in and help Sidney Crosby. So I'm just saying, does it always work out like it did for the Thunder? No, but here's the thing. They didn't tank. They just were really good at drafting. They were really smart about trading, and they were willing to say, we're going to strip it down a little bit, and that means there might be a season or two where it's tough. But the bottom line is they understood they had a really good young superstar to build around, and they wanted to make sure that they put a team around him that can actually win. And now if you look at it, I mean, they are as good of a pick as anybody for the next 2 or 3 years to win the NBA championship. So I look at that and I say, well, guess what? It's so important to draft well. It's so important to develop your players well, no matter what league you're in. And then you go one step further. It's so important to make good trades. I mean, if you look at the trade that brought Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to to Oklahoma City, I would put it right there with the Herschel Walker trade. I think they got 5 first-round picks. They were able to swap 2 other first-round picks, and they got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for Paul George. I mean, if that's not fleecing somebody, I'm not sure what is. I just think that, you know what, when you see a team that does it the right way, you say to yourself, they avoided the pitfall of becoming, quote unquote, almost pregnant. And what I mean by that is, well, we're sort of going to rebuild, but we sort of want to try and win 9 games. We're sort of going to rebuild, but we kind of feel like if we can win 41 games and get to the playoffs, we've got, Crosby and Letang and Malkin, and they've got the pedigree. They could get really hot. And, who knows? That was just kidding yourselves. And I don't mean you out there. I just mean the Steelers and the Penguins. They've been kidding themselves. And that's a part of why they're sort of been stuck in neutral. And now the Penguins are actually going to start taking steps back until they have to go forward. To me, I'd much rather rip the Band-Aid off. When you know it's over, it's over. Maybe in a case of the Penguins where you say, well, Letang and Malkin and Crosby have won 3 cups. So maybe, you know what, we'll go 1 year longer than we would. But they've gone now 3 or 4, probably 3 years longer than they should. And the other part of waiting is there's really not that much value for those guys now. You could have traded them before and got something for them. Now, not so much. Now, even if you were to trade them, you wouldn't get probably the value back in return that you could have got 2 or 3 years ago. So I'm going to be very interested to see how the Penguins approach, the next few weeks. I know the draft is, Friday? But it feels to me like outside the head coach, we're just going to run it back with the same people. And I don't know if that's a good thing, honestly. I just don't. I don't know if that's a good thing. So I just feel like one of those things where I would tell you it's like the Steelers and the Penguins, I think, could do better than they've done. at rebuilding, because rebuilding to me is something that some franchises fear, but sometimes it has to happen. Sometimes you have a group of players who are good, but they're not quite good enough, or there's some dynamic they're missing. And I think that's what, Oklahoma City figured out with their team. They've got a bunch of guys that don't necessarily fit together very well, period. So I just think that it's something that, you look at and you say, boy, they could learn from this. Something else happened today that's kind of interesting. Aaron Rodgers was on Pat McAfee, and I guess he made a little bit of news. I mean, it is news, right? Not that it's surprising at all, because it's just one of those things where, I mean, if you think about it, he's 42 years old or whatever. There's a good chance that he's probably headed, to the scrap heap anyway after this. But he announced sort of today that, hey, you know what? This is probably my swan song. I am probably done. So, you know what? It's one of those things where it's not surprising, but it is kind of news. And that's what it is. He signed a 1-year deal, and he's pretty sure that this is going to be it. And I just don't think that, that's a surprise, but I've already heard all kinds of different things. From the standpoint of maybe it'll motivate him. Maybe it'll push him like this is his last year and he's going to do everything he wants to do. But it just doesn't, necessarily mean much of anything for this year, because I don't believe in that kind of stuff. I think he's a great player, obviously a borderline, not a borderline, he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, whatever. And I think what has to happen, to be honest, is that he's got to stay healthy. And if he does, then he's got a chance maybe to do some things. But I have to laugh, like I said. I have to laugh when, people somehow are trying to find some sort of fault in this. If anything, he's telling the Steelers, listen, you got me for 1 year and then I'm done. So you better go get somebody else and be ready for next year. Because to me, you know what? I think if you're the Steelers, you'd rather know this now, so you can start to put together your plan. And here's the other thing. I think the Steelers probably did know this. I mean, I don't think it's just, him that wanted a 1-year deal. I'm sure they probably were in the boat where, hey, we want a 1-year deal too. So I don't know. I mean, I think that's going to be a big, big factor for the Steelers to go out and figure out what they're going to do about next year. Even though this year hasn't started, I guarantee you they do not want to go into next year with Mason Rudolph as their starter. It's just not something they want to do. Because the reality is it's a situation of where, that requires them to go find another quarterback again, go through this whole thing again, deal with another guy who's a bridge guy again, right? I don't think they want to do that. I think they want to make sure that they have a plan in place for the long term. And, they were willing to go and lock up Aaron Rodgers for a year because they kind of felt like, well, maybe he's got 1 more year in him. But to me, I think next year, if you think about it, they could easily move on from TJ Watt. They won't. They're going to sign him to a deal, but they could move on from him. Cam Heyward could retire. You look at what they have and you start to say, you know what, they could become a much different team next year with a lot of younger guys, so maybe this is their last shot to really go for it. But I don't know. I just don't think that. I don't think that they are thinking that they will go into next year with Mason Rudolph as their guy. It just wouldn't make a lot of sense. So to me, I'm looking at it from that standpoint. I'm telling you, I think, Aaron Rodgers basically saying that he's going to retire at the end of the year. Probably, he's pretty sure. It's not surprising at all. And quite frankly, I think the Steelers are probably happy that he has said this because it gives them an opportunity, to try and figure out what they're going to do for next year. Now, of course, people are losing their minds because basically Aaron Rodgers said, after I'm done with football, you ain't never going to see me again. I just am not going to be around. I'm going to get out of the spotlight and you won't see me. And there are people that are jammed up about this. And I'm like, what are you upset about this? Why are you upset? To me, it's his personality. It's his personality. He can go do whatever he wants to do. And I think that, you know what? It wouldn't be a bad thing. I'm sure he'll still probably, go on McAfee's show here and there, but I don't think it's a bad thing that he wants to disappear. He should go disappear. Get out of here. Right? Just make sure you have a good year this year so we have entertaining things to talk about. But either way, this is a guy to me who's got a plan, and I'm not sure why people are upset about it. It sounds to me, people are upset because everyone said, well, he's a narcissist. He needs the spotlight. He needs this, that, there. Well, guess what? He's basically saying, no, I don't want any of it. I want to go just sort of, fade into black or whatever, and hope that people forget about me. So I think it's different. It's one of those things. I would tell you is that it's great. Okay, it's great that we have these things to talk about, but once the games start. The only thing people are going to worry about with Aaron Rodgers is how good he plays. Nobody's going to care about all his weird sideshow stuff. It's just not going to happen. And I think that's where we're at with that whole situation. By the way, game's always on at Archie's. Get down to Archie's. Archie's home of 87 Wings Monday through Thursday, home of the Paul Zeise grilled cheese sandwich. So get down to Archie's. Have a good time with Archie's. When you get there, tell them I said hello, and hopefully you will enjoy your time at Archie's. Switching gears real fast, the Pirates have won 2 in a row. I don't know what it means other than they won 2 in a row. I mean, again, I look at this season, and I'll make it very clear one more time, and I'll probably get into it more tomorrow than today, but I am not sure, I am not sure that there's more than 1 or 2 guys on this team that shouldn't be on the trading block. We talk very, very similar to the Oklahoma City Thunder. It's great that David Bednar is a great closer, and he's healthy again, and he's mowing guys down again, and he's doing really well. Trade him. You don't need a closer when you're a bad team. Wait to the deadline. Some team needs a closer. They'll come give you more than they should. You're probably not going to trade McCutchen. There's not a value, and it's probably more valuable to keep him. Just if someone's willing to give you baseballs in a bag for Tommy Pham, you should trade him. You should trade Brian Reynolds. You should probably think about trading, if you can, Joey Bart. Why not? Dennis Santana, Andrew Heaney, Mitch Keller. I mean, I can go on and on and on the number of guys that you should think about trading. Just from the standpoint of, you should try and amass as many top prospects as you possibly can. But we'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. Friday will be my next show. Like I said, this week we're going to do 2 Probably the next couple of weeks, we'll think about doing 2, maybe 3, depending on what happens. Obviously, if there's some sort of breaking news, I'll be on. But until then, enjoy your night.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.